I work as a ticket agent for a commuter railroad in the eastern United States. The station where I work is in an upscale suburban town called Brookdale. Before I go any further, a little history. The tracks through Brookdale were built in the 1850s by a now-defunct railroad company. The station, however, was built in 1871 as a replacement for the old flat-roofed wooden structure that was also a hotel. The Victorian stone structure has been a local historic landmark ever since. One Friday night back in 2014, I was sitting in the small office, reading a book. It was 11:30 p.m. and the last train of the evening was due in 20 minutes, and the station was deserted. As I looked up from my book to look at the clock, I saw a young woman standing at the ticket counter. I hadn't heard the heavy wooden door open and close, but I didn't think about it at the time. I turned to the lady and stared. She was breathtaking. I mean drop-dead gorgeous. She was tall and slender, with pale skin, long blonde hair, and deep blue eyes. "May I help you?" I asked, coming to my senses. "One ticket to Central Station," she said in a monotone voice. "Sorry, ma'am, but the last train of the evening goes to Riverton in the opposite direction." I offered to call her a cab, but she said no and walked towards the door that led to the platform. It was then that I noticed her clothes were about 100 years out of date. A peach-colored high-collar button-up with a brooch and long brown shirt. I stood, watching as she walked out the door. I was about to go ask the woman if something was wrong, but then I heard a strange sound. It was the sound of a whistle. Not a horn, a whistle. I then saw the big dull yellow disc of a headlight and heard the chuffing of a steam locomotive approaching its speed. I looked up at the clock and then at my watch. It was only 11:45. Through the window I saw the woman standing at the platform, her figure illuminated by the train's headlight. I watched in horror as she jumped onto the tracks. I then heard the two loud, frantic blasts of the whistle of the ancient steam engine, followed by a blood-curdling scream as the locomotive struck her. I watched as the engine and line of vintage-looking coaches raced by. I ran out to the platform only to see nothing. No train, no mangled body, just empty tracks. Just then I heard the crossing signals clang away as the 11:50 train approached. The modern diesel locomotive and its 3 bi-level coaches pulled into the station with a roar. I watched as a sprinkle of passengers, most of them drunk college students and tired business people, got off. I watched as the people went off in different directions and the train pulled away. I watched the red taillights as they faded into the darkness. Then I ran. I quickly shut off the lights and locked the doors, and then I bolted for my car, gunned the engine and sped off, and didn't slow down until I got home. The next day I went to the library and asked the librarian if there were any old newspapers from between 1900 and 1920 with a story about a suicide at the train station. The elderly woman gave me a look, then went to the back room and fetched a yellow laminated copy of the local paper. I thanked her and took it to a table. The date on the newspaper was 1914, and the headline read, "Daughter of prominent family killed by express." The article went on to say her name was Elizabeth Tucker, and she was the 17-year-old daughter of Horace Tucker, a wealthy industrialist. Mary was arranged to be married to the 24-year-old son of a local financier. She was apparently unhappy with this and arranged to run off with her true love to the city. When the suitor failed to show, she became upset and jumped in front of the night express to avoid marrying a man she didn't love. Alongside the article was a photo of the young girl. Even though the photo was black and white, I knew it was the woman I saw last night. I still work at the station, but never at night for fear of witnessing that ghostly reenactment of that long-ago tragedy. I'm a senior citizen now, and this occurred when I was 4 years old. This was told to me different years when I was in my late teens and early 20s by my mother and older brother and sister. This happened in the mid-1950s, in Buffalo, New York. We lived with my mother and grandmother on the second floor of an old, rat-infested apartment house with holes and crumbling plaster in the walls and ceilings. It was common practice for my grandmother to position rat traps at the baseboards. Cheese was never used, but poisoned meat was. My sister once got her hand snapped in one and was scarred for life. My grandfather's brother and his family lived across the hall from us. Strange things would happen in that house that freaked out the tenants on both floors. I wrote a reflection about one instance. The neighborhood itself was multicultural with a wide variety of income levels and lots of businesses. The house is gone now, but it stood on the busy corner of Sycamore Street, a major thoroughfare that traveled east to west, and a side street I can't remember the name of. Imagine a time when small business owners still used horse-drawn wagons and visited their customers door to door, like when the iceman would deliver your icebox using huge ice tongs and protected his back with a thick layer of burlap. The scissor man would stop by with his grinding wheel and waited for housewives to bring out their utensils to sharpen knives and whatever else that needed treatment. Motorcyclists rode around carrying huge saddlebags with silver accents on their vehicles. The milkman in his distinct truck delivered glass bottles filled with milk or cream straight from the dairy. Across the street and down the block was the local playground, complete with a sandbox, slide, swings, a self-propelled carousel that you would have to run while holding on and then jump onto, seesaws, and a maypole. The neighborhood children all took advantage of any warm weather or day off from school to gather there and play. My brother and sister were allowed to go to the playground whenever conditions were right, but being so young at 3 or 4, I always had to wait until my siblings happened to be in the mood to take me there. I often could hear them and their friends talking, and sometimes I could hear them relating spooky stories to each other. Whether these were real or not, I couldn't know. They had really good storytelling skills. My brother and sister also told stories to me at home, and I never knew if I should believe them or not. So years later when they told me this story, I didn't know what to think until my mom told me the same thing. One spring afternoon, we 3 were in our room for nap time. Mom was in the living room at the front of the apartment. Our room was in the back. The bedroom was large enough to hold a full bed, a bunk bed, a chest of drawers for our clothes, a dresser, and a couple of full toy boxes. My siblings couldn't sleep and played between the top bunk and the full bed across the room. I was asleep on the bottom bunk. They were distracted by what they thought was smoke pushing down from the large hole in the ceiling. The smoke flowed down to the floor, which became a column until it finally formed a female shape and became a woman who my siblings said looked like a witch. They said she wore long dark robes and had a hunched back. This woman skulked over to my bed and knelt down at my head, watching me and totally ignoring them. She had a hooked nose, and her chin jutted out toward her nose, and she had warts. Her hair was thin and loose and hung past her shoulders, and they said they could see her scalp. Her long bony fingers reached out to me as my brother and sister watched in horror. She ignored them as they shouted at her to leave me alone and not touch me. They became frantic. They called for Mom to come and help and make this woman stop. Their shouts and cries got so loud that Mom finally came to the back, angry at them for not being asleep, and was about to get after them for playing and being loud when she stopped just inside the door. She told me years later that my siblings looked terrified. They were pointing at me, at the ceiling, gripping their beds in very near tears. They told her that just as she got to the doorway, the smoke withdrew and sucked backward up into the ceiling, leaving no trace but the smell of something having been burned, which she smelled as well. I never woke up, sleeping through the entire incident. I am in my 60s now, and will never forget what they said happened to me so many years ago. For some context, I am a female aged 20. I have lived all over the country and would like to say I have a pretty normal family and average life. However, since I was little, my parents can recall me talking to things they couldn't see. As a matter of fact, they can recall me sitting in my room for hours and hours, staring into a corner, having full conversations with someone they could not see. My parents have been quoted saying that it wasn't like having imaginary friends because she always looks at one spot, and speaking as if she was talking to another person. I also sleptwalked and can recall having horrible nightmares as a kid. However, nothing has topped the jester. Ever since I was 8, I have had encounters with this awful creature. He usually keeps his distance and never actually harmed me, but he paralyzes me with fear. His behavior is quite strange in the fact that he just sits and stares at me. He circles around me, waits in the doorways, and can be seen lurking around corners. His gaze never leaves me no matter what way I turn or where I walk to, even with him having no eyes. His head is often tilted, his jaw twisted in a grin, and just looking at him makes me think of how much pain he must be in to exist. But that's not the worst part. The staring is nothing compared to the static. Everywhere he goes, I can hear a loud buzzing noise, and often hear the sound before I see him standing somewhere. When he walks, you can hear the faint sound of keys scraping against each other and what sounds like tile flooring. Along with the awful bone grinding on bone sound, he makes his body twist in unimaginably horrifying ways to propel his awful body across the ground. It's almost robotic how he moves, but even then, no machinery can twist like he does to ensure that no matter what, he's always staring at me. He also produces an ear-wrenching sound of sand grinding against a chalkboard when he breathes out of his mouth. Like a smoker, but worse. Much, much worse. His appearance is just gut-wrenchingly unbelievable. You could never prepare yourself to see the jester. No matter who you are and what you have seen in life, he will scar you for life. In the simplest explanation imaginable, take a 90-year-old hunchback and stretch him out to be roughly 7 feet tall with arms extending past his knees, and long fingers with sharp fingernails. Rip off all his skin and most of his muscle till you can see just about every single bone in his body. Rip out his teeth and eyes and cut off his ears and nose. Fill every hole in his body with gauze except his mouth. Then twist his jaw into a horrific smile and wire the back joints so his mouth cannot shut completely. Then take a nude stocking and put it over his bleeding, infected, mutilated body and pull it taut, and make sure to vacuum seal it into his mouth so that it looks like it's his skin. Now imagine all that. The pus and blood from this creature absorbs into the stocking and hardens, making it into a crusty, almost human-like substance. To this day, all I can think about when I look at him is some kind of body bag. And that is the jester. Given that he's a hunchback, his shoulders, hips, and spine all poke out from his skin, and they are always under pressure, like at any moment the skin will tear and his bones and fluid trapped underneath will come bursting out. He can hardly stand upright, but no matter the position, his arms are always touching the floor. He walks on all fours, he crawls on the walls, and has been noted to twist his head entirely around to continue to watch me as he moves to a different spot. There is nothing more disturbing than watching bones grind and rotate under skin. Or so I thought. Until one night I heard him speak. I was about 12 at the time and I was staying at a friend's house and I was sleeping on the couch. It was my first sleepover and I remember how excited I was. We played Build-A-Bears, hung out and gossiped, and went to bed around 10:30 p.m. It wasn't long after I had fallen asleep though, that I woke out of my dead sleep to see the jester had crawled entirely over me. He was spread out like a four-legged spider over my body, propped up on the couch and the floor. He looked down at me and cocked his head. The buzzing was so loud that I thought my head was going to explode. I was absolutely paralyzed as he stood there watching me, his mouth open in a twisted smile. I finally stammered and asked him what he wanted, but what he responded still gives me nightmares and made me wish that I hadn't said anything. He made this awful guttural laugh, the kind you make from your stomach and not to your windpipe, but it sounded like there was fluid sloshing around and erupting in his throat. I thought that at any second a horrifying mixture of blood and pus was going to come leaking out of his mouth onto me. When he was done laughing, he responded with a "You," in a deep, raspy smoker's lung type of voice. He then laughed again, before crawling off and into the darkness of my friend's kitchen. I didn't sleep without someone else next to me for a month after that. I still sleep with the lights on, and I still remember like it was yesterday. It was the most horrific moment of my life. I don't know what the jester is, or what he plans to do with me, but it had been about 2 years since I had an encounter with him. That was until last night, when I saw him across the street staring at me through my window. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And if you would like to help support the channel and get some cool perks, such as our exclusive live stream coming up this weekend, make sure you check out the sponsor button down below It should be next to the subscribe button. It will also give you a channel badge, so you'll look really cool. If you have a story you would like to submit, make sure you email it to urmaker6260@gmail.com. I really appreciate you checking out this video, and if you've ever experienced anything paranormal, let me know down in the comments below. I will catch you all in the next video, and just remember to watch your back, because you never know who or what is watching you. Bad bye.